The smell of sweat and sewage filled the air. The hallway was dark, except for one flickering light that buzzed above a metal door. Behind that door, 60 men were packed into a room built for 20. The sound was a mix of coughing, shouting, and soft crying. It was almost midnight inside Pollsmoor Prison, the place once known for holding Nelson Mandela, now a living nightmare. A guard kicked the cell door hard. "Wake up," he barked. Inside, the men scrambled, trying to make space. The floor was wet, the air thick. A fight had broken out earlier, and no one knew if the man lying in the corner was still alive. 2 other inmates were whispering, hiding a sharpened spoon wrapped in cloth. Someone shouted for help, but the guard only laughed and walked away. Then came the scream, a deep, terrible sound that echoed down the hallway. The lights went out completely. In the dark, there were thuds, screams, and the sound of metal hitting skin. Somewhere someone shouted, "They've started again!" The smell of blood mixed with the heat of the room. The screams got louder, then stopped suddenly, just silence. That night, the news would later say, 7 inmates died in a single cell. But no one outside really knew how bad it was inside Pollsmoor. Not yet. The next morning, the bodies were dragged out one by one. Some of the other prisoners watched in silence, their faces blank. A young man named Marcus pressed his face against the bars, trying not to be sick. He whispered to himself, "This place used to hold Mandela. Now it's hell." He wasn't wrong. But how did this once famous prison become so broken, so deadly? It all started years earlier, when Pollsmoor was just another overcrowded prison on the edge of Cape Town. Marcus had been sent there for robbery when he was 21. He thought prison would be bad, but not like this. When he first arrived, he noticed something strange. The guards didn't seem to control the prison. The gangs did. They had their own rules, their own leaders, and even their own courts inside the walls. The guards just stood back and let them handle things, as long as they stayed quiet. Inside the cell blocks, the gangs were divided by numbers. The 20XS, 27s, and 28s. Each one had its own code. The 20SIXS handled money and smuggling. The 27s were supposed to keep order, and the 28S, they were the most feared. Marcus had no gang, and that made him a target. One night, while lying on his thin mattress, he heard footsteps outside his cell. "New boy," someone whispered. "Come out." He froze. The door slid open slightly, and a tall man with tattoos covering his arms stared down at him. His name was Big Ray, one of the 28s. He tossed Marcus a roll of bread and said, "Eat. You'll need your strength. Tomorrow's going to be bad." The next morning, chaos broke out in the yard. 2 rival gangs started fighting over stolen cigarettes. The guards tried to stop it, but they were outnumbered. Sticks, knives, and metal pipes flew through the air. Marcus ducked behind a bench. His heart pounding as screams filled the yard. A man fell beside him, bleeding from his neck. Another was dragged away by his gang brothers. When it was over, the ground was covered in blood. The guards rounded everyone up, yelling for them to get back to their cells. Marcus looked around and saw something he'd never forget. Big Ray, standing with a broken pipe in his hand, smiling. That night, the smell of bleach filled the hallways as guards cleaned the blood off the floors. In the distance, someone was crying quietly. Marcus couldn't sleep. He whispered to himself, "This isn't a prison anymore. It's a war zone." He was right, and what would happen next would make that day's riot look like nothing. Because deep inside Pollsmoor, something worse was about to begin. Something that would make the world finally look inside and see what had become of Mandela's prison. The morning after the riot, the prison smelled of smoke and sweat. The air was heavy, and flies gathered where the blood had dried overnight. Marcus sat on the cold concrete floor, his back against the wall, his thoughts running wild. He had survived the fight, but he knew things were changing fast. By noon, whispers spread to the cell blocks. One of the gang leaders had been killed during the chaos. His name was Razor, a man everyone feared. He had ruled over Block D for years, and now his men were out for revenge. Everyone knew what that meant. Another riot was coming, one worse than before. In the yard, Marcus tried to stay close to Big Ray. "Keep your head down," Ray told him. "Don't talk to anyone you don't know." Tonight's going to be long. As the sun dropped, guards rushed the prisoners back into their cells early. The tension was thick. Somewhere down the hall, an argument turned into shouting. Then came the first punch, then another. Soon, the shouting turned into screams. "Lock down," a guard yelled, but it was too late. Inmates were breaking the lights, smashing the walls, tearing up anything they could use as weapons. The steel doors clanged as fists and feet hit them. Marcus held his breath as his cell door rattled. Someone outside was trying to force it open. "Open up," a voice shouted. "You're with Razor's killers." Marcus froze. "I didn't do anything," he yelled back. The sound of metal scraping against the lock made his heart race. He could hear men running in the hall. Heavy boots, shouts, the sound of glass breaking. The lights flickered again, and suddenly everything went dark. Then came the flames. Someone had set a mattress on fire, and smoke filled the corridor. Marcus pressed his face against the floor, coughing. The heat grew worse, and he could hear men banging on their doors, screaming for air. "We can't breathe," one shouted. Big Ray's voice echoed from somewhere down the hall. "Stay low. Cover your face." But the fire spread fast. Sparks danced through the bars. The smell of burning plastic and fabric filled Marcus's lungs. Guards shouted orders from outside the corridor, but no one came in. The screams grew louder, then turned to coughing, then silence. When the smoke finally cleared hours later, the damage was everywhere. Walls were black, doors bent, and dozens of inmates were missing. Some were dead, others had vanished into other blocks. For days after, the prison stayed on full lockdown. Food was pushed under doors, and no one was allowed out. The air was so thick with the smell of burnt plastic that it clung to their skin. Marcus tried to sleep, but the nightmares kept him awake. The screaming, the fire, the faces pressed against the bars begging for help. A week later, the warden came. He was a tall man in a gray uniform, eyes tired but cold. He walked slowly down the hall, stopping at each cell to look inside. When he reached Marcus's cell, he paused. "You," he said, "you were near the fire, weren't you?" Marcus nodded weakly. "I didn't do anything. The warden cut him off. "Save it. You're being moved to isolation." 2 guards pulled Marcus out. The hallway felt endless as he was dragged past burnt walls and broken pipes. The isolation cells were smaller, darker, and colder. The door slammed shut behind him with a sound that echoed like thunder. Inside, he sat alone in the dark. No window. No sound but his own breathing. Days passed, or maybe weeks. He couldn't tell. He spoke to himself to stay sane. "Mandela walked through these halls," he whispered. "He had hope. I can't lose mine." But as the days turned into endless nights, hope became harder to find. Then one night, Marcus heard footsteps again. Soft, steady, coming closer. He stood up, his heart pounding. The footsteps stopped right outside his door. A whisper came through the tiny vent. "You think you're safe in there?" It was Big Ray's voice, calm, low, and dangerous. "They think the war is over," Ray said. "It's not. Tomorrow, the whole prison's going to burn." And before Marcus could speak, the footsteps faded away, leaving only silence and a flicker of fear crawling down his spine. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark, knees pulled to his chest, his mind racing with Big Ray's words. Tomorrow, the whole prison's going to burn. The thought wouldn't leave him. He didn't know if Ray was warning him or threatening him. Either way, he knew something terrible was coming. When morning came, the air in the isolation block felt strange. Too quiet, too still. Usually, there was noise from the main cell blocks. Shouting, metal doors clanging, guards yelling orders. But that morning, nothing. Not even the sound of footsteps. Then, around noon, a low rumble echoed through the halls. It started as a distant thud, then another, closer this time. Marcus pressed his ear against the metal door. Men were shouting now, hundreds of voices, angry and loud. The riot had begun. "Everyone out! Burn it all!" someone screamed. The guards tried to fight back, but the inmates had already taken the keys from one of them. Fire alarms started blaring, red lights flashing across the dark corridors. Marcus could hear gunshots, The boom of something heavy slamming into a wall, the screams of both inmates and guards. Smoke began to creep into the isolation block. Marcus coughed and backed away from the door, his hands shaking. "No, not again," he whispered. Not the fire. Then he heard the sound of keys turning in the lock. The door swung open, and two men stood there, faces covered with torn shirts as makeshift masks. One of them held a crowbar, the other a burning piece of wood. "Come on," the man shouted. "We're taking everyone out." Marcus froze. "Who are you?" "We're the 27s. "Move!" He stepped out into the hallway, his heart pounding. Flames were already spreading across the far end of the corridor. The air was thick, burning his throat. They ran to the smoke-filled hall, past open cells, past men dragging bags of food and water. Everywhere he looked, chaos ruled. The prison was falling apart. The roof of one hallway had collapsed. Broken glass crunched under his shoes. Guards were gone or hiding. No one was in control anymore. Marcus and the two men reached the yard, but it was worse outside. Dozens of inmates were fighting near the fences. Flames danced against the walls. The smell of burning rubber and flesh filled the air. Suddenly, Marcus saw him, Big Ray, standing on top of a pile of broken furniture, yelling commands to his men. His face was covered in ash, his tattoos glistening with sweat. "Take the tower." Ray shouted. "No more masters here." Gunfire cracked in the distance. Marcus ducked behind a concrete barrier, his hands covering his head. "This place is done," one of the 27 said beside him. "They'll send the army next." Marcus's stomach twisted. He thought about the stories he'd heard, about the government letting entire cell blocks burn just to stop riots. He had to get out, or he wouldn't live to see the next sunrise. Then came the explosion, a deep, shaking boom that lifted dust and smoke into the air. The ground trembled. Marcus fell to his knees, covering his face as debris rained down. The fire spread faster, feeding on the wind and the chaos. When the smoke cleared just a little, Marcus saw Big Ray again, but this time he wasn't shouting. He was bleeding, holding his side, looking around in confusion. His men were running. The tower had collapsed, and the prison was completely out of control. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police vehicles, fire trucks, and soldiers were closing in. Helicopters hovered overhead, their lights sweeping across the burning yard. Everyone down. On the ground, a voice shouted through a megaphone, but no one listened. Some inmates tried to climb the fences, cutting their hands on the razor wire. Others hid under benches, coughing and crying. Marcus stood frozen, watching the flames climb higher. "This was Mandela's prison," he whispered, "and now it's burning to the ground." The soldiers broke through the main gate, guns drawn, ordering everyone to surrender. Some inmates dropped to the floor, others ran, but Marcus stayed still. The smoke, the noise, the flashing lights, it all felt like the end of the world. A soldier grabbed him by the arm and dragged him to the ground. "Stay down," he yelled. Marcus didn't fight. He just stared at the sky above, dark with smoke, glowing orange in the flames. And then, over the chaos, he heard something, faint but clear. It was Big Ray's voice, shouting from somewhere near the fire. "Marcus, they're not done yet." Before Marcus could turn his head, another explosion ripped through the yard, louder, closer, and stronger than before. The shock wave knocked him off his feet. Everything went black.